Listening to a truly masterful audio thriller is, well, it's a lot like sitting in a pitch-black room with a ticking clock.
Oh, absolutely.
You can't see the killer. You can't see the weapon. But that total absence of sight, it does something incredible to your brain.
It really does.
It makes your hearing hypersensitive to every single floorboard creak, every sharp intake of breath. Yeah. You aren't just passively watching a story unfold on a screen. Your own imagination is actively building the sets, casting the shadows and supplying all the dread.
Yeah, it forces a level of complicity from you, the listener. When a director points a camera at a bloody knife on a TV screen, it's basically a binary transaction. You see the clue, you categorize it, and you move on.
Right.
But when a radio producer uses a specialized microphone setup to capture, say, the dry, scraping sound of a shovel hitting dirt.
Ooh, yeah.
Your mind has to figure out who is digging, what they're burying, and why they're breathing so frantically. The mental real estate required to process audio drama makes it an intensely intimate experience.
Which brings us perfectly to our focus today. Welcome back to Chesterton Radio, coming to you from our broadcast home right here in Atchison, Kansas. You are listening to The Deep Dive.
And we have quite the journey today.
We really do. We've been handed this extraordinary stack of archival audio recordings, contemporary reviews, and historical retrospectives provided by a listener. And we are charting a course straight into a forgotten golden age of suspense. I'm talking about BBC Radio 4's Midweek Theatre.
Such an incredible era.
Right. But we aren't just looking at random plays today. We're unpacking a highly curated countdown of the 10 most popular broadcasts from that specific era.
And it is a phenomenal collection to explore because, when most people think of 20th century radio drama, their minds instantly go to the serialized, never-ending soap operas.
Yeah, or like the highly romanticized, melodramatic pulp mysteries of the 1930s.
Exactly. But Midweek Theatre, which occupied the afternoon and evening slots on British radio, was a completely different beast. This was a sandbox for experimental tone, astonishing Foley work, and a type of gritty, uncompromising writing that really reflected a changing society.
Right, because if there's a cohesive through line in this stack of retrospectives we reviewed, it's how these specific plays tracked the degradation of post-war British morality.
Yes.
We're moving out of that era of clear-cut World War II heroism, and we're stepping right into the 1970s.
And the 70s were rough.
Oh, yeah. A decade characterized by economic anxiety, industrial strikes, and this pervasive, cynical mistrust of institutions.
That's spot on. And as we move from play number 10 down to number 1 on this countdown, you're going to notice a recurring DNA. You'll hear ordinary, middle-class people plunged into just suffocating ethical crises.
The quiet, simmering tension of social realism.
Exactly. The writers of these plays didn't treat crime as a sterile police procedural where the clever detective neatly solves the puzzle at the end.
No, not at all.
Crime in the Midweek Theatre universe is messy. It's deeply human. And the line separating justice from mere institutional survival is constantly shifting.
I want to jump straight into this countdown because the way these plots are engineered is staggering to me.
Oh, they're brilliant.
They take the most mundane, everyday locations like a local bank branch, a dusty coal mine, a village tea shop, and they systematically turn them into psychological bear traps. So let's start the countdown with play number 10. It's a broadcast called Balance, brought forward by R.D. Wingfield.
Ah, Wingfield. He is an absolute master of the agonizing slow burn. And this play perfectly establishes the moral ambiguity we're going to see throughout this whole deep dive.
Yeah, it really sets the stage.
The narrative centers on a man named Peter Flea. He serves as the acting manager of a provincial bank branch.
Just a normal guy.
Right. But his antagonist is a property speculator named Skinner. Skinner is this smarmy, deeply unpleasant opportunist who basically walks into the bank demanding an unsecured loan.
And when Flea politely declines the loan, Skinner just detonates a bomb right there in the office.
Figuratively speaking, yes.
Right, a metaphorical bomb. Skinner claims he recognizes Flea from a highly classified, heavily suppressed incident that occurred 30 years prior during World War II. Specifically, August 1944 at Rookley Airfield.
And here is where the past reaches out to grab our protagonist by the throat. Through their tense exchange, we learn that Flea was part of a paratrooper unit preparing for a drop over occupied France.
Right.
The pilot of their transport plane, a man named Woodhead, flew disastrously low, supposedly to avoid anti-aircraft fire.
Oh, no.
Yeah, because of the altitude, the parachutes of the 16 men who jumped simply did not have time to deploy. Every single one of them died on impact.
Just awful. And one of those men was Peter Flea's brother.
Exactly. It is a devastating piece of backstory.
But the twist here is that Woodhead, the pilot, actually survived the war.
Yeah.
And Flea discovered that Woodhead had been heavily intoxicated during that flight.
He was drunk.
He was drunk. So a few weeks after the disaster, Flea tracked the pilot down in a dark country lane and stabbed him to death. The police wrote it off as an unsolved murder, and the case sat completely cold for 3 decades.
Until Skinner sits down in Flea's office.
Yep.
Skinner claims that by pure coincidence, on that specific day in 1944, he was standing on a nearby hill testing out a telephoto lens camera.
Talk about bad luck.
Right. He says he caught Flea in the act of murdering Woodhead, and he has the negatives locked away in a safe deposit box.
So Skinner weaponizes this information, and he doesn't just want, like, a few £1,000s to keep quiet. He demands £60,000.
Which is a fortune.
A total fortune. Flea obviously doesn't have that kind of liquid capital on a branch manager's salary. So Skinner hands him a plan to rob his own bank.
And this is where the historical context of the 1970s banking sector becomes crucial to understanding the mechanics of the plot. Skinner isn't asking Flea to put on a ski mask and crap a physical safe.
No, much smarter than that.
He wants to exploit the bank's newly implemented computer systems. Skinner has forged a computerized paying-in book for Gregson's, which is this massive local department store that deposits its daily cash at Flea's branch.
Wait, I need to pause you there for a second, because the mechanics of this absolutely fascinated me in the retrospectives. How does a random property speculator forge a bank book in the 1970s without raising massive red flags at the teller window?
It's a great question.
Because it isn't like today where you can just mock something up on a laptop and print it out.
No, it all comes down to MICR, magnetic ink character recognition.
Okay, I've seen that on the bottom of check.
Exactly. In the 1960s and 70s, banks transitioned to automated reader sorter machines to handle the massive volume of paper checks and deposit slips. They printed the routing and account numbers at the bottom of the slips using a special ink containing iron oxide.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so when a slip was processed, the human teller just looked at the handwritten name on the top, but the machine magnetically read the numbers on the bottom to route the funds.
Right. So Skinner essentially prints a deposit book that physically looks identical to the one used by Gregson's department store. The teller sees the Gregson's logo on the top and just assumes everything is fine.
Yep.
But Skinner has altered the magnetic iron oxide numbers at the bottom so the computers will route the deposit directly into his personal account.
Precisely. And Gregson's is about to deposit its massive Christmas holiday cash intake. A staggering £217,000.
Wow.
All Peter Flea has to do is stand behind the teller line and casually swap the forged book for the real one before the cashier processes the deposit. The computer will literally do the rest of the stealing for them.
It's brilliant. But the tension of the play doesn't really come from the mechanics of the forgery, does it? It comes from the domestic pressure cooker waiting for Flea at home.
Oh, absolutely.
Flea goes home and tells his wife, Mary, about the blackmail. He says he refuses to rob his own bank, arguing that it violates his fundamental principles. He is basically willing to turn himself in for the murder of the pilot. But Mary's reaction, it is chilling.
Mary represents a terrifying, calculating pragmatism. She completely dismisses the morality of 1944. She points out that if he confesses to the 30-year-old murder, he goes to prison, the bank fires him, and she loses the comfortable middle-class lifestyle she's grown accustomed to.
She refuses to become the disgraced wife of the Rookley killer.
Exactly.
Her dialogue is like a scalpel. She looks at her husband and says, "I've had the hard time. If you want to throw everything away, then go ahead.
Yeah.
But you'd throw me away as well, because I'd leave you."
That's brutal.
It is. She forces him to do it. She basically forces him to become a thief just to protect her mortgage.
It presents the listener with a profound ethical quagmire. Think about Flea's original crime. He avenged 16 men who were killed by the gross negligence of a drunk pilot.
Right.
In Flea's mind, that wasn't a murder. It was a military execution. He views himself as an honorable man who corrected a horrific injustice.
Yeah, you kind of sympathize with him.
But his wife strips away all that romanticized post-war justification. She reduces his defining moral act to a mere liability that threatens her financial security.
So Flea caves. He goes to work, he swaps the magnetic books, and the computer blindly funnels £217,000 into Skinner's account.
The heist works.
It works perfectly. Skinner comes into the bank, legally withdraws the massive pile of cash, and drives off in his yellow sports car. But before he leaves, he hands Flea a sealed envelope.
And inside the envelope is a note. It reads, "It was all a bluff. There are no photographs. I was never at Rookley in my life."
A completely devastating revelation. Flea just threw away his entire career, compromised his principles, and stole a fortune based on a total fabrication.
But Wingfield, the writer, refuses to let the story end there. The Foley design in the next scene is superb.
It really is.
Because earlier in the broadcast, we learn that Flea is a mechanical hobbyist. He loves tinkering with engines. While Skinner was in the office gloating, Flea was out in the parking lot loading the heavy bags of cash into the trunk of Skinner's yellow sports car. And the audio production highlights this subtle metallic sound of a wrench tightening lug nuts.
Yes. Because as Skinner is driving away with the money, we hear a news bulletin bleeding through a police radio. Skinner's yellow sports car lost its brakes at the top of a steep hill. The car crashed, and Skinner was killed instantly. Flea sabotaged the brake lines while he was loading the money.
Flea hears the report and feels a wave of euphoric relief. He protected his secret, eliminated the blackmailer, and solved the problem.
But the news anchor continues.
They do. The police report notes that there was a passenger in the car with Skinner, an unidentified woman who was also killed in the crash.
Oh, man. Flea picks up the phone to call his wife Mary to tell her the good news. And the phone just rings and rings, no answer.
The implication is heavy and inescapable. Mary, who had brutally pushed Flea into committing the robbery to save her comfortable lifestyle, decided to cut her losses entirely. She packed her bags and ran off with Skinner and the stolen money, only to be killed by the very trap her husband set.
It has the architectural perfection of a Greek tragedy. The exact mechanical skills Flea used to resolve his crisis ended up destroying the very person he compromised his morals to protect.
It's incredible.
It really makes you ask, does his final act of sabotage make him a calculated monster? Or is he simply a tragic victim of an inescapable past?
That is the lingering question the broadcast leaves hanging in the air, and, well, it serves as an elegant thematic bridge to our next play. Because if Balance Brought Forward is an exploration of calculated white-collar guilt in a comfortable suburb, our number 9 play drops us into a scenario characterized by visceral, suffocating physical guilt.
Oh, this one is an absolute pressure cooker. We're moving to play number 9, All Through the Night by Jerry Jones.
We transition from the carpeted office of a bank manager right into the grim, dust-choked reality of a Welsh coal mining town in the 1970s.
What a pivot.
Huge pivot. We follow a miner named Davy Morgan.
And the setup relies on a deeply intimate betrayal. Davy is engaged in a clandestine affair with an English woman named Mary. Davy's wife, Maya, is away visiting family for a few days, so Mary comes over to his house.
Right.
But the script immediately establishes that Mary is psychologically fragile. She harbors a deep, aching depression and a profound hatred for the suffocating atmosphere of this Welsh mining town.
She tells Davy that every single morning she watches the 11 o'clock train leave the station heading back to England, and she weeps because she is never on it. She begs Davy to leave his wife, pack his bags, and get on that train with her.
But Davy provides a harsh, sobering reality check. He admits that he actually loves his wife. He never intended for the affair to become emotionally entangled. He merely wanted a physical distraction while his wife was out of town. So he rejects Mary's plea to run away.
The rejection triggers an extreme, desperate reaction. The next morning, as Davy is rushing to get his gear ready for his shift at the mine, Mary becomes completely hysterical.
She loses it.
She clings to his coat, screaming that she is getting old, that she has nothing else in her life, and that she refuses to let him abandon her. Davy tries to pry her hands off, and in the ensuing physical struggle, he shoves her backward. Mary trips, falls hard against the furniture, and strikes her head.
The audio production here focuses on the sudden, terrifying silence that follows violence. Davy sees blood pooling on the floor. He checks her pulse, panics, and comes to the horrified conclusion that he has killed her.
And he has absolutely no time to process it or clean it up. The siren for the mine shift is wailing. If he's late, he loses a day's pay and draws a ton of suspicion.
Right, he can't just call in sick now.
Exactly. So he does the only thing his panicked brain can think of. He throws a heavy wool blanket over her lifeless body, leaves her lying in the corner of his living room, and sprints out the door to his shift, planning to figure out a cover-up story when he returns.
This is where the historical and environmental context really elevates the story from a domestic thriller into a masterpiece of audio tension. The 1970s in Britain were defined by fierce industrial disputes, particularly within the coal mining sector.
Very true.
And the writers use this societal unrest as a brilliant plot device. Davy takes the mechanical cage deep underground to the coalface. And the Foley artists do incredible work here to make you feel the literal weight of the earth pressing down.
It's so claustrophobic.
You hear the crunch of boots on loose gravel, the muffled, echoing delay of pickaxes striking rock, and the heavy, labored breathing in a confined space. Davy is physically trapped 500 feet underground, which flawlessly mirrors the psychological entrapment of the secret he left in his living room.
And then the situation deteriorates from bad to catastrophic. A militant union organizer among the miners, a man named Evans, halts production.
Perfect timing.
Oh, the worst timing imaginable. 2 workers were unfairly dismissed by the management earlier that week, and Evans declares a stay-down strike. He demands that none of the 100 men on the current shift leave the mine until the management reinstates the fired workers.
Put yourself in Davy's shoes for a second. You're covered in coal dust, miles away from daylight. You know that your wife, Maya, is scheduled to return home at any moment. You know there is a bloody corpse hidden under a blanket in your living room. And a union leader is physically blocking the only exit to the surface.
Davy's desperation becomes agonizing. He begs Evans to let him use the mechanical lift. He claims he has a severe personal emergency.
Which he does.
He really does. But Evans is rigid. He views the strike through the lens of absolute ideological purity. In Evans's mind, allowing one man to break the strike to attend to personal matters undermines the solidarity of the entire union. The collective is more important than the individual.
The claustrophobia just drips from the speakers. Davy realizes negotiation is useless. He snaps. He screams at the other men, calling Evans a tin pot dictator who is just using the strike to inflate his own ego. And the ideological debate instantly devolves into a brutal, chaotic fistfight in the pitch-black tunnels between Davy and Evans.
The audio of the fight is raw and unstructured. Davy fights with the ferocity of a wild animal because he's fighting for his literal life. He isn't fighting over union politics. He is fighting to get back to that living room before his wife opens the front door. He manages to batter his way past Evans, commandeers the lift, and races to the surface.
He runs through the streets of the town, completely out of breath, his face smeared with coal dust. He bursts through his own front door, stares at the corner of the living room, and the blanket is just lying flat on the floorboards. There is no body.
None. Instead, there is a piece of paper pinned to the blanket. Davy picks it up, and the note reads, "I'm not going to cry about that train anymore."
Mary wasn't dead. The shove had merely knocked her unconscious. While Davy was trapped underground fighting for his life, she woke up, realized the utter hopelessness of her situation with a man who would leave her bleeding on the floor, and finally walked to the station to catch the 11 o'clock train to England.
The psychological whiplash is profound. Davy experiences a tidal wave of relief, but it's deeply tainted by a lingering, toxic shame. Moments later, his wife Maya walks through the door, completely oblivious to the fact that her living room was nearly the site of a murder investigation.
Wow.
The play ends with Davy safe, but fundamentally altered by the knowledge of how easily his entire existence could have been obliterated over a meaningless fling.
It really shows how effectively radio can take a broader societal issue like an industrial coal strike and weaponize it to heighten personal, domestic terror.
It's masterful.
But let's shift gears because our number 8 play takes that concept of institutional rigidity and explores what happens when the institution itself is rotting from the inside out.
Yes. We are moving to Letter of the Law, another exceptional script by R.D. Wingfield. If the previous plays explored the guilt of individuals, this broadcast subverts the traditional police procedural to examine systemic corruption.
The protagonist is Detective Sergeant Shaw. And let's be clear, Wingfield completely destroys the hero cop trope here.
Oh, completely.
Shaw is not a noble investigator. He has just been demoted from the rank of inspector and transferred to a grimy, overworked provincial precinct because he violently broke a handcuffed suspect's jaw during an interrogation.
Shaw is a hardened, cynical, and dangerously violent man, but he is also brutally competent at his job. He arrives at his new precinct to find a police force buckling under the weight of 2 major unresolved crises.
What are they?
Well, first, the town is being plagued by a series of highly organized, flawlessly executed wages robberies. Armed gangs are ambushing payroll deliveries with military precision.
Okay, and the second crisis?
The second crisis is much darker. The press has dubbed a local predator the Dolly Man. This individual is stalking and attacking young girls in the remote, marshy areas surrounding the town.
So Shaw is stepping into an absolute nightmare, and he's assigned to a deeply dysfunctional investigative team. His superior is Inspector Johnson, a depressed, functioning alcoholic whose wife abandoned him 5 years prior and who now lives in squalid conditions, barely holding his career together.
Not exactly inspiring leadership.
No. And on the opposite end of the spectrum is Inspector Nash, the polished, arrogant, impeccably dressed golden boy of the division who is leading the task force on the wages robberies.
Wingfield lays out a masterful trail of misdirection here. The Dolly Man has a terrifying habit of sending taunting, handwritten warning letters to the precinct before he strikes.
Creepy.
Very. But Shaw notices a critical anomaly. The letters arrive on the precinct's main desk without any postage stamps or postmarks. They aren't going through the mail system at all.
Right. Based on this, Shaw deduces it must be an inside job. Someone within the police station is physically leaving the letters on the desk. Shaw's suspicion immediately falls on Inspector Nash, the arrogant golden boy. Shaw notes that Nash's patrol logs conveniently place him near the remote marshlands whenever an attack occurs. Furthermore, Nash exhibits a vicious, unprompted hatred toward Shaw.
The tension skyrockets when Shaw's own 9-year-old daughter goes missing.
Oh, that's terrifying.
Shaw and the alcoholic Johnson tear through the town in a desperate frenzy. They finally corner the Dolly Man, and the narrative delivers its first major twist. The predator isn't Inspector Nash. It's a man named Norton.
Norton. Wait, the local postman.
Exactly. The postman who delivers the daily mail bags directly into the police station.
It makes horrifying perfect sense. Norton doesn't need postmarks because he physically hands the mail to the desk sergeant.
Yeah.
As a postman, he knows every remote, isolated path in the county.
And Wingfield gives Norton a deeply tragic, fractured motive. Norton's own daughter had died of an illness years ago. The grief shattered his sanity, twisting his protective instincts into a predatory compulsion.
They apprehend Norton. Shaw's daughter's recovered safely, and as a listener, you exhale. You think the mystery is solved and the broadcast is wrapping up. But then Wingfield drops the hammer.
The second twist.
Shaw confronts Inspector Nash in the locker room. Nash isn't the Dolly Man, but during the chaos of the manhunt, Shaw pieced together how the armed gangs were executing the wages robberies with such impossible precision.
Nash is the mole. The polished golden boy of the precinct is a deeply corrupt officer. He has been systematically taking massive bribes from the criminal syndicates in exchange for providing them with the highly classified police patrol routes and the exact timetables of the factory payroll deliveries.
Nash doesn't even try to deny it either. He just completely embodies the cynical rot of the era. He looks at Shaw and defends his treason, arguing that the gangs were too organized, they would have stolen the money regardless.
He basically says the money was gone anyway.
Right. He claims that once a cop takes a single bribe to look the other way, the syndicates own him forever. And then he mocks Shaw's history of police brutality, saying, "At least I never hit anybody. I'm not one of their blue-eyed boys, you see. Not a very good copper."
This leads to the most controversial and fascinating moment of the play. Nash has his bags packed, he has his passport and his illicit money, and he is preparing to flee the country to avoid arrest. Shaw, the violent, demoted officer who was exiled to this precinct in disgrace, has Nash dead to rights, and Shaw lets him walk out the door.
I remember rewinding the audio the first time I heard that. I was like, why on earth does he let him go?
Shaw makes a calculated decision based on institutional self-preservation. He knows that if he arrests Nash, there will be a massive public trial. The press will discover that a high-ranking inspector was orchestrating armed robberies. The scandal would utterly destroy the public's trust in the local police force. Shaw calculates that letting one corrupt officer escape quietly is a necessary evil to protect the reputation of the badge.
It forces you to critically evaluate what justice actually means. Is letting a criminal escape an act of pragmatic leadership? Or is it a fundamental betrayal of the law itself?
That's a tough call.
Shaw sacrifices objective morality to protect the system. It is an incredibly cynical, bitter ending that perfectly encapsulates the disillusionment of the 1970s.
And that rigid, systemic thinking provides a seamless transition to our number 7 play. Inspector Shaw protected his institution from a scandal. In Slow Fuse, we see what happens when criminals try to apply rigid institutional engineering to the art of the heist, and how the chaos of the universe intervenes.
Slow Fuse is arguably the most audacious plot in our countdown. We are introduced to Major Derry, a highly decorated, incredibly arrogant bomb disposal expert for the British Army who is weeks away from retirement.
Important detail.
Derry is given a routine security tour of the newly constructed bullion vault at Consolidated Silversmiths, a facility holding £750,000 in raw gold, silver, and platinum.
The security director brags that the vault is a triumph of modern engineering. It is protected by 7 independent alarm systems, a weekend time lock, and closed-circuit television cameras. He boldly declares that breaking through the vault doors is a mathematical impossibility.
But Major Derry looks at the problem differently. He agrees the doors are impenetrable, but notes that the 4-foot-thick concrete walls might be vulnerable to a highly concentrated explosive charge.
But you can't just detonate military-grade explosives in the middle of a busy British industrial estate without the entire city noticing. So Derry devises a plan that is so brilliantly manipulative, it's almost funny.
It really is.
He notes that the factory is excavating land right next to the vault to build an extension. Derry and his accomplice, Sergeant Fraser, sneak onto the construction site at night and bury a deactivated World War II unexploded bomb, a UXB, in the dirt.
And to understand the brilliance of this cover story, you have to understand the legacy of the Blitz. In the 1970s, it was still incredibly common for construction crews in the UK to unearth massive, live German bombs that had been buried in the mud for 30 years. It was a recognized, terrifying hazard.
Right. So when the builders arrive the next morning and discover the bomb, the authorities immediately call in the Army's top disposal expert, Major Derry.
How convenient.
Derry and Fraser arrive on the scene and take absolute control. They order the police to evacuate a 5-block radius. They have the authorities set up roadblocks, completely halting city traffic.
The sheer audacity of using the local police force as your unwitting getaway drivers is staggering. They clear the area perfectly.
Derry then informs the police commander that the bomb's fusing mechanism is too unstable to move. He states they must perform a controlled explosion to neutralize the detonator on site. He orders his men to stack hundreds of heavy sandbags around the bomb.
Okay, here's the trick.
Exactly. He arranges the sandbags specifically to muffle the sound and direct the entire concussive force of their plastic explosives directly against the side wall of the bullion vault.
It goes flawlessly. They detonate the charge. The blast tears a massive hole straight through the 4 feet of concrete. The alarms inside the vault start screaming. But because Derry had the entire industrial estate evacuated, there was no one left to hear them. They casually step through the rubble into the vault and start loading the gold into their military transport truck.
The mechanical precision of the heist is beautiful, but the universe has a profound sense of irony. While they are furiously digging through the dirt and concrete rubble to widen the hole, Derry's boot strikes something metallic buried deep in the mud beneath the vault's foundation.
It's another bomb.
Yes. But it isn't the deactivated prop they planted. It is a genuine, live, highly volatile 1,000-pound German bomb from 1944.
Oh my gosh.
And as Derry brushes the dirt away from the rusted casing, he realizes with mounting, paralyzing horror that this is the exact bomb he failed to locate during an air raid 30 years prior when he was a young lieutenant stationed at this very site. He had spent a week digging for it, assumed it was a dud, and gave up.
The past physically reaches out of the dirt to trap him. The karma is delicious. Derry's foot slips and becomes wedged under the massive iron casing. He is pinned. His Sergeant Fraser panics and abandons him.
The Foley work in the climax is excruciating. You hear Derry's ragged breathing. You hear the delicate, terrifying scrape of his tools as he tries to defuse a 30-year-old rusted fuse in the dark, knowing that millions of pounds of stolen gold are sitting 3 feet away. He murmurs to himself, sweating over the corroded wires. Which one do I cut, the left or the right?
He makes his choice, snips the wire, and the audio just cuts to a massive, deafening explosion.
The broadcast fades back in on the sterile hum of a hospital room. Derry survived the blast, though he is heavily bandaged, with a shattered leg and cracked ribs. But as he opens his eyes, he realizes there is a police inspector sitting patiently beside his bed.
The blast from the real bomb didn't just injure Derry. It blew the entire vault wide open, scattered the stolen gold bars across the street, and exposed their entire fraudulent operation to the authorities who rushed back to the scene.
It is a masterful demonstration of hubris. The most meticulously engineered heist in history was undone by a failure of diligence 3 decades earlier. It suggests that no amount of planning can insulate you from the consequences of your own past mistakes.
And speaking of meticulous planning, let's pivot to our number 6 play, Sins of Commission. If Slow Fuse was about military explosives and physical force, this play treats grand larceny as an intellectual exercise, executing a heist with the polite, procedural detachment of a corporate merger.
It is a biting satire of the British corporate class and the bureaucratic mindset. We follow a man named Fletcher, a loyal mid-level manager who is unceremoniously and rather cruelly fired from his position at a prestigious diamond vault firm as part of a ruthless overhead reduction strategy.
Fletcher is deeply bitter. He dedicated his life to the company, and they discarded him to save a few pounds on the balance sheet. His vulnerability makes him the perfect recruit for a shadowy, soft-spoken figure named Mr. Merry.
Mr. Merry operates a highly successful criminal syndicate, but he manages it exactly like a modern, legitimate corporation. He approaches Fletcher with a business proposition, a consultant role on a commission basis.
That's very professional.
Right. Merry's team plans to steal 800,000 pounds in uncut diamonds from Fletcher's former employers, and he offers Fletcher 15% of the total haul for his insider knowledge of the vault's security protocols.
But the detail that makes Mr. Merry so brilliant is his obsession with accounting. He tells Fletcher that his 15% cut will be subject to a standard 10% agency fee to cover the syndicate's operational overheads, things like fuel costs, lock picks, and the salary of his office secretary, Jean. He is a master thief who actively worries about the rising cost of office stationery.
Merry's entire team consists of men like Fletcher, highly skilled professionals who were unjustly terminated by corporate executives. They are driven by a collective, burning grievance against the employer class. And because they are former professionals, their approach to the robbery relies entirely on exploiting corporate procedure rather than using violence.
Fletcher informs Merry that the Diamond Vault features a complex three-part combination lock. It cannot be bypassed, blown up, or picked. The only way to open the vault is for the 3 senior directors of the firm to input their specific codes simultaneously.
So Merry realizes he can't break into the vault. He has to politely ask the directors to open it for him. The team focuses on the alarm system. In the 1970s, alarm systems relied on the General Post Office's physical copper wire telephone network. When tripped, the alarm automatically dialed a dedicated line at the local police station.
Merry's men, dressed in maintenance uniforms, climb down into a manhole outside the diamond firm and physically splice into the copper phone lines. They intercept the connection.
Then, in the middle of the night, they deliberately trigger the vault's alarm. The system dials out, but instead of ringing the police station, the call is routed directly down into the manhole where Merry is waiting with a handset. He answers, posing as the police dispatcher, and records the alarm activation.
The next phase is where the satire really sings. Merry and his men change into flawlessly tailored, highly convincing replica police uniforms. They drive to the lavish suburban homes of the 3 corporate directors.
In the middle of the night.
Yes. In the middle of the night, they knock on the doors and act exactly like reassuring, authoritative police inspectors. They politely inform the directors that the vault's alarm has been tripped and request that they accompany the officers to the facility to investigate the premises.
The directors, conditioned to defer to authority and eager to protect their assets, comply without a second thought. They are escorted to the vault, where Merry respectfully asks them to input their combinations to verify that the inventory is secure.
The directors unlock the massive steel door, pull out the trays of diamonds to check them, and Merry's men simply draw their weapons, say, "Thank you very much, gentlemen," shove the directors inside, and lock the door behind them.
They walk away with 800,000 pounds without firing a single shot or breaking a single sweat. The brilliance of Wingfield's writing here is the subtext. The criminals are vastly more organized, punctual, and procedurally sound than the legitimate business executives who originally fired them.
It is a phenomenal critique of white-collar detachment. Mr. Merry treats stealing a fortune with the exact same emotional numbness as a CEO approving a mass layoff. But if Sins of Commission shows us criminals successfully mimicking the authorities, our number 5 play, Murder Locked Out, explores the terrifying reality of what happens when the actual authorities use the cloak of national security to act like criminals.
Oh, this broadcast transitions us from corporate satire straight into the chilling paranoia of the Cold War era. It begins masquerading as a standard, localized police procedural. A chemist named James Lakin is found dead, having plummeted from a first-floor window of his apartment building.
Just a tragic fall, it seems.
Right. The initial assessment suggests a tragic accident. Perhaps he locked his keys inside, attempted to scale the drain pipe to an open window, and lost his footing in the rain.
But the investigative dynamic is what drives the plot here. We have Detective Constable Hodges, A young, meticulous, and eager officer paired with Sergeant Day, a cynical, exhausted veteran who is coasting toward retirement and just wants to close cases as quickly as possible. Hodges is analyzing the crime scene and fixates on a bizarre anomaly. Lakin's body is only wearing one shoe.
Sergeant Day tries to dismiss it. He argues that the shoe probably fell off during the fall and a stray dog ran off with it. He wants to sign the paperwork and go to the pub.
Very typical Day.
Very typical. But Hodges applies basic logic. He points out that it was pouring rain. If Lakin had walked from his parked car to the drain pipe, he wouldn't have done it wearing only one shoe. And despite a massive search of the muddy garden, the gutters, and the apartment above, the second shoe simply does not exist.
Hodges' relentless pursuit of the missing shoe connects Lakin's seemingly accidental death to a gruesome, unsolved murder from the previous week, a young woman whose skull was crushed in the woods near the Agricultural Research Center where Lakin was employed.
When Hodges and Day visit the research center to ask questions, they stumble into a labyrinth of deception. They quickly realize the facility has nothing to do with agriculture. It is a highly classified Ministry of Defense laboratory developing experimental, highly lethal biological weapons.
They're forced into a meeting with the facility's director, a man named Mr. Smith. Smith embodies the terrifying, sanitized evil of government bureaucracy. Under pressure, Smith casually admits the truth. The facility's lead scientist, the brilliant Dr. Kendrick, is a severe, homicidal psychopath.
Wow, he just admits it.
Just admits it. Kendrick murdered the young woman in the woods in a fit of rage. Lakin, his subordinate, discovered the truth and threatened to go to the police. So Kendrick went to Lakin's apartment, struggled with him losing Lakin's shoe in the violent scuffle, and threw him out the window to stage the accident.
The revelation is shocking, but Mr. Smith's response is what elevates the play into a masterpiece of ethical horror. Smith acknowledges that Kendrick is a serial killer, but states unequivocally that the government is actively covering it up. He tells the detectives that Kendrick's weapons research is considered vital to the survival of the nation in the event of a Soviet conflict.
It is the ultimate nightmarish escalation of the trolley problem. If a man is systematically murdering innocent civilians, but his research might theoretically save millions of lives in a hypothetical future war, do you lock him in a cell and lose the data, or do you let him keep his lab coat and look the other way when the bodies pile up?
And this wasn't purely science fiction. The writers were playing on the very real anxieties surrounding the British Official Secrets Act.
Yes, the OSA.
The OSA was a sweeping piece of legislation that essentially allowed the government to place a blanket gag order on civil servants and suppress almost any information by vaguely citing national security. The culture of deference to authority in Britain meant that institutions rarely challenged these directives.
We see that deference in action. The chief constable of the police force sides with the Ministry of Defense. He orders Sergeant Day to immediately drop the investigation. He promises Day a lucrative promotion to the rank of inspector if he signs a doctored report concluding Lakin's death was a slip and fall.
A brag, basically.
Exactly. And to ensure compliance, the ministry actually sends agents to the local mortuary to physically destroy the autopsy report detailing the missing shoe.
It creates a fascinating thematic mirror to Inspector Shaw's decision in Letter of the Law. In that play, Shaw let a corrupt cop escape to protect the police force's reputation. Here, Sergeant Day, the tired, cynical cop who initially just wanted to go home, is pushed past his moral breaking point.
He finally snaps.
He realizes that if the law can be suspended for the most intelligent or important man in the room, then the law is just a fiction used to control the poor.
Day makes a monumental sacrifice. He blatantly defies the Official Secrets Act, tracks Dr. Kendrick down, catches him in the middle of attempting to murder a ministry security guard who asked too many questions, and arrests the scientist on the spot. By placing Kendrick in public handcuffs, Day destroys the cover-up, guarantees he will never get his promotion, and likely ensures his own prosecution under the OSA. He chooses absolute justice over institutional obedience.
It is a profoundly redemptive character arc. But the clarity of that moral choice stands in stark contrast to our number 4 play, Saturday Roster. If Murder Locked Out dealt with a tangible government conspiracy, this broadcast plunges the listener into a suffocating, Kafkaesque nightmare where identity itself is weaponized.
I found this play deeply unsettling because of how it manipulates the listener. The framing device is deliberately disorienting. It opens on a quiet Saturday afternoon inside a massive, brutalist government building referred to only as the Ministry. A man named Hustler, accompanied by his stenographer Sally, is conducting a formal interrogation of a terrified, exhausted couple in a soundproof basement room.
The audio design immediately establishes a sense of isolation. The Foley artists use a deadened acoustic environment, no background hum, no traffic noise, just the sharp, intimidating echo of Hustler's questions. The couple claims to be a Mr. Byrne and a Mrs. Wallace. Through a series of tense flashbacks, they recount the bizarre sequence of events that drove them to seek asylum at the ministry.
It starts with an economic trap. Byrne and Mrs. Wallace were looking for a quiet weekend getaway and found an advertisement for an isolated country cottage offered at a suspiciously steep discount by a landlord named Mr. Wallace.
When they arrive at the property, the atmosphere is drenched in dread. The cottage is miles from the nearest road, the electricity has been cut, and there is a heavy padlock securing one of the upstairs bedrooms. Driven by a creeping sense of paranoia, Byrne takes a tire iron and breaks the padlock.
Inside the dusty room, they find a single leather suitcase. Byrne opens it, and the contents defy logic. The suitcase is packed with clothing that is identical down to the specific fabric of the trouser suit and the unique pattern of the necktie to the exact outfits Byrne and Mrs. Wallace are currently wearing.
It is a moment of pure psychological terror. They realize that someone has been meticulously tracking them, studying their wardrobes, but the terror crystallizes when Byrne runs outside to start their car and flee. The engine won't turn over.
It's dead.
It's dead. He pops the hood and discovers that the rotor arm has been surgically removed from the distributor cap. They aren't just stranded, they have been deliberately immobilized.
The horrible realization washes over them. The landlord, Mr. Wallace, knew that a team of professional assassins had been dispatched to murder him and his wife. So Wallace aggressively discounted the cottage, lured two strangers who bore a passing physical resemblance to them, provided a suitcase of identical clothing to ensure they matched the assassins' descriptions, and trapped them there. Byrne and Mrs. Wallace are meant to be the decoys. They are supposed to catch the bullets meant for the landlord.
They manage to escape through the woods just as a dark sedan pulls into the driveway and armed men step out. They hike for miles, flag down a passing truck, and eventually navigate the bureaucratic maze of the city to secure an emergency meeting at the ministry to report the assassination attempt. This brings the flashback to a close, returning us to the sterile interrogation room with Hustler.
And this is where the unique power of the radio medium executes a flawless betrayal of the audience.
Exactly. For the entire duration of the play, you, the listener, have trusted Hustler. He has a calm, authoritative, reassuring voice. He asks logical questions. You assume he is the designated problem solver, the safety net for this traumatized couple. But after Byrne finishes the story, the stenographer leaves the room, and Hustler takes a private phone call.
We hear Hustler's voice drop an octave. He speaks into the receiver and says, "The hit failed. The decoys got away. Yes, they're sitting in my office right now."
The revelation is paralyzing. Hustler isn't a ministry official tasked with protecting them. He's the architect of the conspiracy. He is the man who hired the assassins to kill the real Wallaces. The couple managed to survive the trap at the cottage, ran to the authorities for help, and inadvertently surrendered themselves directly to the man trying to orchestrate the murder.
Because there is no visual component, you couldn't see Hustler locking the door or signaling his guards. You were blinded by the medium, forced to rely on the cadence of his voice, making you just as naive and vulnerable as the victims.
It demonstrates how easily audio can bypass our logical defenses and manipulate our trust. And that theme of misplaced trust brings us to play number 3, Cleft Stick. We leave the sprawling, faceless paranoia of government ministries and enter an arena where betrayal is excruciatingly intimate, the marriage bed.
The premise of Cleft Stick is a masterclass in escalating domestic chaos. A man named John Marlowe, suffering from chronic insomnia, takes a walk through the dense woods behind his property late one night. He stumbles across the battered, lifeless body of a local man named Bryant. John rushes back to his house and wakes his wife Joan to call the police.
But Joan reacts with sheer, unadulterated panic. She breaks down and confesses a terrible secret. She tells John that while driving home earlier that evening, she accidentally struck Bryant on the dark road. Blinded by fear of a vehicular manslaughter charge, she dragged his body into the tree line and fled the scene.
John is a deeply devoted husband. Faced with the prospect of his wife going to prison, he makes a split-second catastrophic calculation. He goes to his study, retrieves his personal registered pistol, walks back out to the woods, and fires a single bullet into Bryant's chest.
His logic is twisted but protective. A gunshot wound fundamentally changes the nature of the investigation. It covers up the blunt force trauma of the car accident. John knows the police will easily trace the ballistics back to his pistol. He plans to confess to the murder, claiming self-defense or a struggle, willingly taking the fall to ensure his wife is entirely shielded from the investigation.
It is an act of ultimate misguided self-sacrifice. He goes home, cleans the mud off his shoes, and waits for the authorities. When the police eventually arrive to question them, John waits for Joan to back up their rehearsed narrative about him finding the body.
And Joan delivers the ultimate betrayal. She sits on the sofa, looks the inspector in the eye, and completely denies any knowledge of an accident.
Oh, she completely throws him under the bus.
She acts utterly horrified, bursts into tears, and tells the police that John has been acting erratic and violent, heavily implying that her husband murdered Bryant in cold blood.
John is utterly blindsided. He is suddenly trapped in a frame-up of his own meticulous design. He shot the body, he left his own footprints, and then the police search his study and find the motive. Tucked inside a ledger is a freshly typed check for £1,000, made out to Bryant, bearing John's forged signature.
The police construct a flawless theory. Bryant was blackmailing John over a secret indiscretion, and John lured him to the woods and executed him to terminate the extortion.
But the truth, revealed to the listener through Joan's private conversations, is so much darker. Joan actually did hit Bryant with her car.
Yeah.
But she saw it as an opportunity. She was engaged in a passionate affair with a younger man named Weber. Joan typed the blackmail check herself. She manipulated her devoted husband's protective instincts, tricking him into staging a murder scene so the state would execute him, leaving her free to inherit his lucrative business and run off with her lover.
John's defense solicitor visits him in his holding cell and lays out the grim reality. John has no alibi. His gun is the murder weapon. His handkerchief was found near the body, and the check provides the motive. From a legal standpoint, the frame-up is airtight. John is going to hang.
It seems completely hopeless.
But the climax of the play hinges on the interaction between human malice and the cold indifference of mundane office technology.
This is where the 1970s tech saves the day. In his study, John used a portable dictating machine, a heavy reel-to-reel magnetic tape recorder he used to draft business memos. When John first returned from the woods and Joan was hysterically confessing to the hit and run, John had been working at his desk.
In his rush to comfort her, he never switched the machine off. The magnetic tape kept silently spinning in the background. The entire unvarnished truth, Joan detailing the car accident, begging John to cover it up, and John outlining his plan to shoot the corpse is perfectly preserved on audio tape.
The ultimate sociopathic scheme is completely dismantled by a piece of stationary equipment left in the record position. It is such a satisfying resolution because the betrayal was so profoundly cruel.
It is satisfying, but our next play offers no such comfort. We are moving to number 2 on our countdown, Adequate Reasons. If the previous play dealt with the betrayal of a spouse, this broadcast crosses into the darkest, most unfathomable psychological territory, the betrayal of a child.
I will warn you, this is unequivocally the heaviest, most harrowing piece of audio in the entire archive. The narrative centers on a nightmare scenario. A young boy named Mark is kidnapped from his bed in the middle of the night. A ransom is demanded, but tragically, the drop goes wrong, and the boy's body is discovered in an abandoned building. He's been murdered.
The police manage to apprehend a drifter named Foster, who is caught red-handed carrying the briefcase full of marked ransom money. The case seems closed, but Foster, despite his criminal record, swears with visceral desperation that he was only hired as a bagman to collect the cash. He insists he never touched the child.
The core of the broadcast is a tense, claustrophobic interrogation sequence. The lead investigator, Inspector Nuttall, is a man of chilling mathematical logic. He sits down with the boy's grieving mother, Claire. Claire is playing the role of the devastated, fragile victim flawlessly. But Nuttall ignores the emotion and starts aggressively picking at the structural threads of her timeline.
The tension is built entirely through the juxtaposition of medical science and human testimony. Nuttall produces the coroner's report. Based on liver temperature and rigor mortis, the police surgeon has conclusively determined that the boy was dead by 8:00 p.m. the previous evening.
But Claire's official statement to the police tells a different story. She claimed that she went upstairs and looked in on her son sleeping peacefully in his bed at 8:30 p.m. and checked on him again at 10:00 p.m. before finally discovering the window open and the bed empty at 1 a.m.
Nuttall slowly tightening the verbal trap is incredible radio. He leans across the table and presents the paradox. At 8:30, he had been dead for half an hour. At 10, he had been dead for 2 hours. You told my officers he was breathing. What do you say to that?
The inescapable, horrifying conclusion crashes down on the listener. Foster, the drifter, didn't kill the boy. Claire murdered her own son early in the evening, carefully staged the open window, and fabricated the kidnapping plot to extort money from her wealthy husband and cover up her crime.
But a mechanical timeline isn't enough to sustain a radio drama. You need the psychological why. When the police execute a search warrant on the family home, they find a bedroom at the end of the hall that has been permanently padlocked. The husband explains that it belonged to their eldest daughter, who contracted polio and died at the age of 8 the previous year.
So sad.
Claire refused to let anyone touch the room, preserving it as a sterile, dust-covered shrine to her grief.
It recontextualizes the horror. The polio epidemic cast a long, terrifying shadow over mid-century parents. Claire's grief didn't resolve. It festered and curdled into a toxic, resentful madness. She became psychologically incapable of tolerating the fact that her son was alive, healthy, and making noise while her perfect daughter was dead. She couldn't stand the asymmetry, so she corrected it.
The irony of the title, Adequate Reasons, is devastating. When the broken husband asks the inspector why she did it, the underlying truth is that there is no adequate reason. There is no logic that can bridge the gap between a mother and the murder of her child. There is only the dark, irrational abyss of human psychology. And because this is an audio drama, the listener is forced to construct that padlocked room in their mind, to visualize the untouched toys, the stillness, and the terrifying silence of a home consumed by madness.
It is brilliant, and it proves that you don't need visual jump scares when you have writing that explores the deepest, darkest corners of the human condition. But we need to take a breath, step out of the darkness, and move to the pinnacle of our countdown. We have arrived at the #1 spot on the Deep Dive's exploration of Midweek Theatre. It is time for the featured play spotlight, The Weather for Murder by Philip Levine.
This broadcast earns the top spot because it operates on multiple levels simultaneously. It is a synthesis of everything that makes this era of radio spectacular. The seemingly safe domestic setting, the meticulous mechanical planning, and a brilliant layer of metafictional commentary on the mystery genre itself.
It is so incredibly clever. The setting is the polar opposite of the previous plays. We are in a bright, cheerful, aggressively quaint village tea shop. Our protagonist is Elsie, a slightly lonely but highly observant woman who works behind the counter alongside the strict owner Sarah and a quiet, mousy waitress named Miss Pierce.
Right.
But Elsie has a secret ambition. She's spending her evenings writing a murder mystery novel.
Because Elsie is obsessed with making her novel structurally flawless, she uses her position at the tea shop to constantly interrogate the local law enforcement. Whenever Sergeant Foster, the village policeman, comes in for his afternoon roast beef and tea, Elsie peppers him with questions, treating him as an unwitting consultant for her book.
They sit amidst the clinking of teacups and the smell of scones, casually debating the mechanics of the perfect murder. Elsie pitches plot points to the sergeant. She suggests having her fictional villain use a house fire to destroy the evidence of a poisoning.
Sergeant Foster chuckles and points out the logistical flaws in her writing. He explains that a perfect murder isn't just about the method, it requires an alignment of external variables. He says, "What happened at Ivy Cottage last week depended on the weather, the victim dropping off to sleep, and the specific choice of curtains."
He is referencing a tragedy that just rocked the real village. A wealthy, notoriously cruel woman named Mrs. Everett died when her home, Ivy Cottage, burned to the ground. The police strongly suspect her husband, Mr. Everett, because their marriage was famously toxic, and the pharmacy records show he recently purchased a heavy prescription of barbiturate sleeping pills.
So you have this brilliant layered dynamic. Elsie's plotting a fictional murder in her notebook while analyzing a real, nearly identical suspected murder that occurred down the street. It is art imitating life and life imitating art.
Sergeant Foster breaks down the forensics for Elsie. He explains that if Mr. Everett slipped his wife the sleeping pills, the coroner would easily detect the barbiturates in her bloodstream during the autopsy unless the fire burned hot enough and fast enough to completely incinerate the body. Foster notes that the fire at Ivy Cottage spread with unnatural speed because the living room was draped in highly flammable, cheap synthetic curtains.
In the 1970s, before modern fire retardant regulations became strict, certain synthetic fabrics were essentially solid gasoline. Foster jokingly advises Elsie that if she wants her fictional murderer to succeed, the killer shouldn't just light the match. They need to deliberately manipulate the victim into purchasing highly flammable curtains beforehand to ensure the trap is set.
It is just a throwaway piece of banter over a cup of tea. But Elsie is sharp. She realizes that Sergeant Foster isn't just giving her writing advice. He is subconsciously describing the exact blueprint of how the real Mrs. Everett must have been murdered. Mr. Everett supplied the pills and the match, but someone else must have ensured the house was filled with the right kind of kindling.
This is where the broadcast turns the listener into a co-detective. Levine embeds the crucial clue in the mundane background chatter of the tea shop. Much earlier in the play, before the murder is even discussed, we hear a brief, seemingly irrelevant exchange. Elsie's coworker, the quiet, unassuming waitress Miss Pierce, asks the boss for the afternoon off. She claims the sun glares through her window when she tries to type, so she needs to take the bus to the nearby town of Soho to visit a specific draper shop and buy some netting.
It sounds like total filler dialogue to establish the setting. Just mundane village life.
But the payoff is spectacular. Later in the week, Elsie happens to visit that exact same draper shop in Soho. She asks the clerk if they carry a specific highly flammable material known as loose weave cellulose net. The clerk looks surprised and says, "That's exactly the material your friend from the tea shop bought last month in bulk, though she gave the name Mrs. Johnson for the receipt."
Boom! The pieces snap together with terrifying precision. The quiet, mousy Miss Pierce, the woman who pours tea and sweeps the floor, secretly took a bus to another town, used a fake name, and purchased the exact, highly flammable cellulose curtains that were subsequently installed in Mrs. Everett's living room right before the fire.
Elsie deduces the horrifying reality. Miss Pierce and Mr. Everett were engaged in a deeply concealed affair. The quiet spinster was actually the architect of the perfect murder. She provided the accelerant. He executed the plan.
What elevates The Weather for Murder above every other play on this list is how it weaponizes the tropes of the cozy mystery genre against the listener. It lulls you into a false sense of security with the quaint setting, the aspiring writer, and the gossiping villagers. You assume the danger is out there at Ivy Cottage. But the murderer used the exact structural blueprint Elsie and the sergeant were laughing about, and the killer has been standing 2 feet away from them the entire time, quietly serving them scones and listening to them try to solve her crime.
It is the ultimate testament to the Midweek Theatre philosophy. The most ruthless, calculated malice doesn't reside in shadowy alleyways or criminal syndicates. It exists in the bright, cheerful, mundane spaces of everyday life. The broadcast demands active listening because the solution to a brutal murder is hidden inside a boring conversation about shopping for window treatments. It is a masterpiece of auditory misdirection.
When you step back and look at this entire stack of plays, from the countdown of number 10 down to number 1, a profound picture emerges. We've gone from Peter Flea sabotaging the brake lines of a yellow sports car, to the suffocating gravel of the Welsh coal mine, to the explosive irony of Major Derry's unexploded bomb, and finally to the fiery, calculated climax at Ivy Cottage. What does this deep dive ultimately tell us about the legacy of Midweek Theatre?
It tells us that these writers and audio producers understood something fundamental about human psychology that modern media often forgets. They proved that you do not need a multi-million-dollar visual effects budget to generate unbearable suspense. You do not need explicit gore or sprawling action sequences. What you need is an intimate understanding of pressure. You need a locked room, a ticking clock, and characters who are forced to justify the unforgivable when pushed to the brink.
They recognize that the most expensive high-definition screen in the world is the listener's own imagination. When you listen to these broadcasts, the BBC isn't showing you the horror. They are giving you the blueprints, and your brain is doing the heavy lifting. You are the one visualizing the smear of coal dust on Davy's face. You are the one picturing the terrifying identical clothing folded neatly in the doppelganger's suitcase. You are the one staring at the padlocked door of a dead child's bedroom.
And because it relies on your active imagination, the suspense is inescapable. You cannot simply close your eyes or look away from the screen because the screen is inside your head. Radio is an incredibly intrusive, intimate medium. It is literally a voice whispering a confession or a threat directly into your ear. These plays endure because the moral rot they explore, the greed, the paranoia, the institutional corruption is timeless.
I really hope this deep dive has inspired you to seek out these specific archival broadcasts and experience that unique tension for yourself. The way they engineered sound to manipulate emotion is something every fan of storytelling needs to hear. We want to thank the listener who provided the incredible stack of retrospectives and audio that made this exploration possible. If you want to keep the signal alive and support our ongoing deep dives into the hidden, brilliant corners of history, the best way to do that is by finding us and subscribing on Substack. Your support is what allows us to keep unpacking these complex narratives week after week.
It has been an absolute privilege to navigate the shadows of these stories with you.
So as we wrap up, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
In our modern era of constant frictionless visual overload, where there is a high-definition screen in every room and an endless feed of video in every pocket, are we slowly losing the cognitive ability to actively imagine? We're so used to being shown the monster, but the next time you find yourself alone in the dark, ask yourself, could a modern, high-budget television show ever terrify you or grip your soul, quite like the sound of a single footstep recorded on magnetic tape waiting for you to figure out who is standing outside your door? Think about it. Until next time, keep listening.